Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dan Sweet. I'm Director of Public Relations and Communications for Helicopter Association International. And welcome to our webinar today. We have a great topic, as always, low altitude route infrastructure. And we need more of those now. So let me start with today. While we're giving everybody a chance to join, let's start with a poll question. And let me bring that up here. There we go. If you can take just a second and answer the poll question, we do appreciate it. Give everybody another 10 to 15 seconds to join in and answer the poll question today. Okay, let's go ahead and get things wrapped up on the poll question. Let's see what our results are. Do you fly IFR? Yes, or regularly. We had 47%, looks like the majority today. Occasionally, 32%. No, not at all, 21%. And only when needed to recover from IIMC, 0. I do appreciate seeing that. Good numbers. Okay. I'm hoping that my screen is showing. There we go. Looks like it's supposed to be working here. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We have Jim Viola, who is the president and CEO of HAI. Of course, my advancement buttons are not working. Technology is just not my friend after Heli Expo. Art Branch, who is the new entrant mission area lead for the MITRE Corporation. Kurt Ederer, Senior Aviation Systems Engineer for the MITRE Corporation. Sean McCourt, Aircraft and Avionics Mission Lead at the MITRE Corporation. We have Gemma, who is the Air Traffic Control Specialist and Acting Airspace Modernization Group Manager for the FAA. And we have Michael Hilbert, who is the Program Control Lead, Aircraft Modernization Group for the FAA. Our webinars are interactive. We do encourage questions and comments today. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, please use the question module at the bottom of your screen or on the side of your screen. The chat feature works. We try to pay attention to the chat feature, but we're going to focus on the question module just to make sure that anything that comes in from the audience, we want to make sure we get that on during the Q&A session, which will be at the very end. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available to anybody who wants to see it right now on our website or on our YouTube channel, usually within about 24 hours after the webinar ends. You're welcome to share the link with coworkers, friends, or anybody else you think that might be interested in this topic. And so now I'd like to introduce Jim Viola, the President and CEO of HAI.
Thanks, Dan. Welcome back to our webinar series. We all just got back from Heli Expo. Hopefully some of the people watching this also just got back from Heli Expo 2022. You know, after being shut down for a year, this year was really good to get back and join some very enthusiastic crowds, you know, because our industry relies on relationships, and seeing everyone face to face again was just outstanding, and almost as enjoyable as seeing the 600 booths that were spread across our shore floor. Wow. Yeah, I can't talk today, Dan, either. Show floor. Believe it or not, we're already deep into next year's planning also for Atlanta. So hopefully you'll be able to join us there if you didn't join us this year. Now, if you've paid attention to our industry or HAI for any length of time, you know one of our biggest goals is to reduce accidents caused by pilots entering IMC. It's definitely one of the leading causes of accidents in our industry, and we've been taking multiple approaches to solve this problem. One of the most interesting programs right now is 56 Seconds to Live. It's a robust educational program that is named for the average amount of time a pilot has before crashing after entering into the clouds, 56 seconds to live. The program starts with a video showing a typical pilot making a series of decisions that ultimately lead to a crash. The educational portion that examines multiple points throughout the video where the pilot could have made a different decision, which would have provided a different outcome. The program has been out now for about a year, and if you haven't taken the time to watch the video or participate in the educational program, please do. I invite you to visit HAI's website or the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team website to participate in this award-winning project. During Heli Expo, we also announced the latest release of our new flight risk assessment tool. HAI worked with a Swiss-based aviation software and training provider, NGFT Solutions, to develop this tool. The tool is available to HAI members for free, so please visit our website today to try it out. Another tool in avoiding catastrophic crashes in IMC conditions is the use of low altitude IFR structure. So flying IMC on a low route infrastructure. And that's why we are here today. We are seeing an increased demand for IFR or procedure helicopter operations throughout the United States and the need for more helicopter-friendly IFR routes. Helicopter operators and pilots sometimes have a hard time finding direct, safe, reliable routes that address the specific needs and capability of rotorcraft. Therefore, staying at a lower altitude, no need to really get up into the higher altitudes. So in response to the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team recommendation that's calling for more low-level routes, the FAA has begun researching the potential of adding a low-altitude route structure to the National Airspace System. The agency has tasked MITRE Corporation's Center for Advanced Aviation System Development with collecting and analyzing data that could help drive route structure strategy. Today, we are joined by representatives from the MITRE and the FAA who will report the progress with their research. They will also let you know how you can help them with developing this infrastructure. To get a presentation started, I will ask Art Branch from MITRE to join me on the screen and let Art take it away.
Thank you, Jim, and good afternoon and good morning to those of you who are attending internationally, and thank you for spending your St. Patrick's Day afternoon with us for those that are US based. This work that is based out of the FAA's Mission Support Services is focused on developing a strategy and ultimately a roadmap for low-level route structure. I'm going to introduce Mr. Jim Origi and Mike Hilbert from Mission Support Services Airspace Modernization Group to both give background on themselves and on the context for the work.
Hi, Art. Jim Origi here. Thank you for the introduction. I am the group manager for the Airspace Modernization Group at FAA headquarters. My background is long-time career in military air traffic control. For the last 16 years, I've worked at FAA headquarters in performance-based navigation. Now, I know a lot of our friends out there in the rotary wing community are probably asking, well, what have you done for me for performance-based navigation? Well, that's part of the reason that we've asked MITRE to help us assess what the capabilities are and what the requirements are in the NAS. In the Airspace Modernization Group, the FAA is embarking on developing a new strategy to continuously assess and modernize the airspace. Got to watch it. You don't want to hit your, don't want to hit our, our number 6 button on there, or you'll go on mute, as I just found out. So what we're trying to do is we've embarked on developing a airspace modernization roadmap to continuously assess and to update, to modernize the airspace infrastructure. So the airspace infrastructure includes both the arrivals, departures, the en route environment. It includes regulatory and non-regulatory airspace. And we also recognize that over the years, the rotary wing capabilities have improved significantly. We know that industry airframers are delivering aircraft that are very well equipped, capable of flying, instrument flight rules on a regular basis. And we'd like to make sure that we assess those capabilities and the need for that route structure as we develop our roadmap. I'd like to go ahead and then introduce my my coworker, Mike Hilbert. Mike is doing a lot of work with our our ongoing efforts for rotary wing operations in Maine. So Mike, if you would like to join us and go ahead and explain what you've got cooking up there in Maine.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Hilbert, and my background is 20 years Air Force air traffic controller. And since 2003, I've been engaged with activities with the rotorcraft community and the FAA, first as a contractor, now as an FAA employee, working on new technology and instrument procedures and routes. I was one of the key players in the FAA for the first two TK RNAV routes out of New York City down to the Washington, D.C. area. And currently I'm the project manager for the Life Flight of Maine project, which is embarking on a project to provide the low altitude route structure for the Life Flight of Maine, who's an air ambulance operator in Maine. So we're developing a route structure throughout the entire state, and we're also amending some special instrument approach procedures and departures out of their landing and departure areas to connect them up with the en route structure. Now, all these routes and procedures are currently special, so they fall under the specials program, but the FAA is funding the work on these procedures and routes. The goal of the project is multifold. The first goal is to get an infrastructure out there for the operator to use. We're also exploring the possibility of taking some of those special routes and converting them into public routes. There may or may not be a use case for that. And we're also developing a repeatable process and standard operating procedures, and also trying to standardize processes throughout the agency on getting a route structure like this in other areas where there's a need. So with that, I'll hand it back off to Art, and I'm just really happy to be here. And I always love working with the helicopter community. It's a great bunch of people, and I'm glad to be involved with this.
Thank you, Mike. And before we get started, I would also like to take the opportunity to introduce the MITRE CAASD team. So there we go. A little bit of background on myself. I've been with MITRE CAASD for a little over 5 years, primarily focused on new entrant operations, specifically UAS and urban air mobility. Dabbling also in avionics, equipage and forecasting, and safety modeling. For rotorcraft, my most recent contributions have been focused on the ACAS XR safety initiatives. And I would like to give Mr. Kurt Ederer a chance to introduce himself at this time. So Kurt, if you're on, please go ahead and share video and come off of mute.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. So Kurt Ederer, I've been with MITRE for 12 years. Excuse me. Recently focused on bringing the rotorcraft domain into the SIAS program. And so we can talk offline about SIAS. It's kind of a rather big topic, but yeah, great project for 2 years now, helping bring rotorcraft into the SIAS program. Prior to that, I was with American Airlines for 16 years as a hub operations manager. So pleasure working with this group. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt, and Mr. Sean McCord as well.
Good afternoon. Sean McCord here. I've been with MITRE about 15 years now. Previously worked in the airlines, pilot, check airman, director of flight technical, and pretty strong background in avionics. And also related to helicopter, worked with Mike Hilbert back in some of the original development of the TK 502, 504 routes. And again, appreciate the opportunity to work with this community. It's always nice to have an impactful need, and happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And in addition to the three of us, we also have three other members who weren't able to be presenters today. Claudia McKnight and Todd Stock have been and still are fantastic rotorcraft subject matter experts. Claudia, drawing off of her background from the U.S. Army and Coast Guard, and Todd is a retired military rotorcraft operator, and Graham Miller is our lead data scientist that we're borrowing from the Advanced Aviation Safety Program. But certainly the work that we're doing in support of Jim and Mike can't go forward without them. So this is the team, and we're very fortunate and happy to have them on. The agenda for today, we're through the intros and overviews. Next, I'd like to step through the data collection efforts, the context work that we've done in order to figure out what the needs are and what the potential for a state-of-the-art for IFR, low altitude routes, can be, along with the development of a composite analytical model looking at multiple parameter inputs, including low-level weather, and all of this to really inform the potential for routes when married with the operator and stakeholder outreach and the information that we've been getting from you, the operators and industry members, and the open and candid feedback and inputs, and how that's shaping the route structure strategy effort. So a little bit of background on MITRE CAASD. So the MITRE's mission-driven teams are dedicated to solving problems for a safer world. Through public-private partnerships and federally funded research and development centers, we work across government and in partnership with industry to tackle challenges to the safety, stability, and well-being of our nation. MITRE runs the Center for Advanced Aviation System Development, CAASD, which is the federally funded research and development center devoted to the FAA's long-term research and development needs and addressing the critical challenges facing the National Airspace System. So one of the major benefits of the industry outreach to date is, as a federally funded research and development center, MITRE CAASD is not subject to Freedom of Information Act requests and has a duty to de-identify proprietary and sensitive information received from industry before sharing results externally. That allows us to aggregate or additionally de-identify any information or data that is shared with us in trust to advance some of these research needs for the FAA. So some pertinent efforts that we currently are supporting include the ACAS-XR work that I was a part of a few years ago, RTCA, Special Committee 213, EFVS, and synthetic vision systems, the Advanced Air Mobility, Urban Air Mobility Strategic Planning and Near-Term Implementation teams, Digital Co-Pilot, the ASIAS Rotorcraft initiative that Kurt's leading, and the Joint Interagency 5G Radar Altimeter Interference work, the JFRAY. So I'll now talk about the data collection. So before we got started with the IFR route structure strategy, we wanted to really make sure that we understood what was currently available and what were the recent recommendations. So we looked at previous efforts from industry, previous recommendations, to better understand the needs of the low-level community and what requirements and recommendations were currently outstanding, which were being acted upon. So it's that previous efforts box. For aircraft equipage, we wanted to understand what the potential and for operations and what was already on hand. So we took a look at the aircraft registry to determine both where the majority of rotorcraft are registered, along with joining that with other data sets to try and determine where they're based, where they operate, what facilities and airspaces are used, along with the level of frequency. So that gives us kind of like a baseline of usage. In addition, we looked at the op specs to determine which operators in the aircraft were authorized to execute a set of given operations, which ones were ops approved, and furthermore, looked at additional data sets to provide estimates of fleet equipage and capability. So a little bit of a delta between those two. What's the difference between what you're approved to do and what you're actually capable of? And less worried about what is the holdup or gap between those, so much as what are the number of aircraft that have that capability versus that approval. Next, we looked at the aviation forecasts and equipage curves to determine the expectations around future capabilities. And all of this was done kind of like as pre-work to help us in our outreach to you, the operators, to better understand your day-to-day and your business needs, and come up with potential benefits and as we talk to you. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the low-level composite model. Used multiple inputs. Primarily, we started with the surveillance analysis. So being the federally funded research and development center for the FAA, we are privy to NOP data along with other pieces of data. So we have a large body of surveillance data available. What we did was filter for known rotorcraft and other operations below 12,500 feet AGL. Next, we identified the known rotorcraft registrations and mode S codes. So cooperative aircraft that we had a higher level of confidence in. And the result, going over 12 months of data, was 2.2 million tracks that were identified, and lended itself to further analysis for this low-level route structure strategy. You can see on the image on the left, we decomposed the tracks into origin-destination pairs. That provided us the supply and demand, if you will, a very crude version of that, without being as worried about the route or track that was used to get there itself, figuring that our composite model could be informed and potentially inform future tracks later. So the image on the right is a heat map of all helo activity over the course of one day throughout the NAS. So the next step after the surveillance analysis is to come up with a method to extract the origin and destination pairs that you saw on the previous slide for the 2.2 million tracks and bend them. So we developed a Geohash method to further allow for the identification of geographically sensitive areas or areas with greater operational frequency. This example is a fairly complicated one, especially the east to west leg. There was a mid-track touchdown in the east on Matituck, where there was a 15-minute station keeping, and the base level track analysis that we have did not show that stoppage. It was only on the time step and on the altitude. So what this is indicative of is a landing zone or a arrival at scene type operation. And we had to filter the data and come up with a method to identify those further, knowing that one of the main uses for air medical transport are those arrivals at scene and then return to destination. So we created a method to identify those touchdowns, to further decompose the surveillance data and improve the information on where the operations are occurring and where demand is. So the next step after identifying those potential touchdown areas is identifying additional parameters. So things that we've looked at and added are terrain information via the shuttle radar topography mission data set, which is a NASA and NGA set with a 30-meter fidelity. Currently, we're using it at a 500-meter fidelity. And that gives us features of interest like high elevation areas with rapidly increasing terrain elevation. Think like the Ozarks. Additionally, we're looking to pull in obstacles. Another input parameter is population densities, knowing that this is another driver for demand. We're also looking at the facility and airspace use information. We're doing that via targets so that we can see which facilities are most affected. And this will help inform the recommendations and opportunities for the next phase of the route structure development for the FAA. So next, I'm going to step you through the evolution of the model. Image 1 on the top left shows the uniform geospatial framework with the origin and destination pair. We haven't introduced any additional data. It's just here's your origin and destination. Image 2 below the first one shows the added fidelity of the shuttle radar topography mission data set. There's a bunch of additional dots in there to show that layer. And we allow for the introduction of other parameters at the higher resolution. Image 3 on the right is closer to the finished result, and it's the result of the composite model providing the input parameters. So the parameters for this output model are the population density and the SRTM data set. The plan currently is to allow the model to remain modular with the input data and to allow for tunable parameters or tunable weights for assignment based off of subject matter expert input, local observations, or observed behaviors. And that multivariate parameter input for the model allows for a specialized use at the facility or local center level. In addition to this, a multivariate parameter that will be input to this composite model is the low-level weather model that Kurt will discuss next.
And thank you, Art. Appreciate that. So go ahead and advance to the next slide. So yeah, so for our objective of identifying potential risks associated with operating between these specific helipad pairs that Art was just talking about, we've been working on creating a low altitude weather model, and we want to be able to answer some of those questions you see up here on the screen. Are some areas predisposed to higher rates of IMC? If so, can the operator avoid a statistically potential UIMC by reasonably altering their routes? And then also asking questions about, avoiding thunderstorms and freezing rain and other potential rotor blade icing phenomena, and then also turbulence and other safety of flight phenomena. And so as we started putting this model together, for some projects, we like to turn to the ASOS data set. And in this particular case, it was definitely not the right direction to go. So we started heading in a different direction, because with ASOS, stations are often too far apart, and interpolating kind of gives you sometimes some great results and other times not so great. So so we wanted to move on to a different data set. Next slide, Art. So what we did is we turned to the NOAA's high resolution rapid refresh data set. So the HRRR, and more easily called the HER data set. And so, I mean, although HER is technically a forecast model, it does contain a unique feature, which is the 0-minute forecast. And what that essentially is a modeled interpolation of current weather data from multiple sources, including ASOS, but with no actual forecast aspect, since it's actually just 0 minutes into the future. So for example, if you were to pull up the 1200 Zulu release of the HER data set, it will contain predicted weather conditions for 12 o'clock Zulu itself. So, so we can interpret this as being largely in the spirit of hourly METARs, and except in the case of using the HER data set, you actually end up with an entire grid of data rather than scattered data points. So this grid that you kind of see on the left side of the screen. But NOAA does advertise this data set as being 3 kilometer by 3 kilometer squares, and can't really take that literally. So I mentioned this in case any operators listening ever decide to kind of dive into the direction of using the HER data set for your own operations. If you were to lay out these squares, you would end up with a bunch of overlaps as you start moving more towards the northern states because of the kind of the longitudinal convergence at the poles. So in actuality, they're not really squares. They're these non-parallelogram polygons. And so as we started diving into putting this model together, it's a little bit resource heavy to kind of continually dig through and draw these polygons, because you can't just use a single anchor point and draw a square. You have to grab multiple anchor points to make sure you're getting the polygon shape correct. But we opted to make the process a lot more efficient by creating templates. So at every even numbered latitude, so 45.0, 46.0, 47.0, we created a polygon template. So then we can still just grab that one corner point, grab the template, we know the exact shape, and then be on our way. So that really speeds up the process. Next slide, Art. So in using the HER data set, it's actually a very rich data set. It contains about 180 different meteorological parameters. But for this project's purposes, specific parameters were identified that best achieve the objective, which is the creation of representative weather score for each HER cell relevant to helicopter operations and safety. So with some subject matter expert guidance, the parameters that we pulled out of that large 180 parameter data set, the parameters we chose to focus on were indicators of thunderstorms, freezing precipitation, turbulence. That one we're working on. It's kind of a tricky algorithm, but if we're able to make it work, we're definitely pulling that in. And then of course IMC. And then kind of to continue to tell the weather story, we also are pulling in parameters that show us visibility, ceilings, pressure, temperature, just to kind of backfill that complete weather story. And then we take these parameters and we give each one of them a weighting factor that reflects its operational and or safety importance. And then depending upon available processing resources, each score can either be the average of 365 annual days or 8,760 annual hours. So obviously if we go with the hourly, we end up with a much richer data set, but it's also a much larger data set. It's 25 times larger. So we're experimenting with what our data processing resources will allow there. So, and then as a further exercise to produce the most effective results, another option we're exploring is to create 2 separate weather scores, a warm month weather score and then a cold month weather score, to tell those two separate stories. Also, rather than completing assessments in the context of the entire CONUS or other large subregions within the NAS, the preferred approach is to limit the context to a much smaller vicinity, so maybe a 50 or 100 mile radius around the particular heliport pairs that we're looking at. So then you don't end up with any situations where you're looking at New England or Great Lakes weather in the context that also includes Florida, Texas, and California, for example. So all the data for each of these cells is ultimately aggregated down to a single number between 0 and 9, and then 9 being the preferential score. So next slide. And so with this HER grid now generated and staged, the next step is to merge it into the composite model that Art was talking about. But to kind of illustrate what this low-level weather model attempts to contribute to the creation of IFR helicopter routes, just as an isolated metric, if you were to, on this diagram, imagine a direct flight between some helipad pair. And if this entire route happens to pass through all red cells, as you see here, and that would be cells with the scores below 4, as you see on the left-hand side there. This HER grid attempts to pull the route out of the red as much as possible without creating any unreasonable sidestepping. An all-green route would be ideal, but maybe not realistic. So even grazing the edge of green and flying through yellow presents an option that is statistically better than the weather perspective from kind of this all red route that you see in the middle. And then the final step, like I said, is to merge that into the composite score. So I will pass back to you, Art.
Thank you, Kurt. And now I'm going to ask Mr. Sean McCourt to give a synopsis of the operator and stakeholder outreach activities and how interaction and information from many of the members of HAI has informed this work. Sean?
Great, thanks, Art. Yeah, so found I have to start with the beginning of this. There's a couple interesting things. The survey was interesting because it aligns well to our engagement with industry so far. We've done our best to engage across a range of operator types, and I'll state them this way. Medevac, of course, executive transport, oil services, government entities, police, those kinds of activities, training, and then of course other, which might include your logging operations and another bin of particularly VFR type operations. So we're trying to understand from a range of operators that fly helicopters without assuming anything. Again, what do they need? What would they want from infrastructure? And sometimes the answer is, I don't need or want anything. And so it was kind of interesting to hear the results of the survey, which is great because we see that, yes, occasional no. We do occasionally get, we receive some information on not needed, only needed for inadvertent cases. So that's interesting, it was 0 today. But I think that really aligns well to the kind of information we're looking for and to understand and to influence the strategy. I'd also say that when you look at what Kurt just presented and what you saw earlier, if you have building blocks of, we can understand, via data and data sets, what operations look like. Where are people flying? Why are they flying? You saw. We can consider weather, and we'll get into that in terms of feedback. But what you saw from Kurt is, we can consider those factors. What some of you might have looked at that chart and said, well, for my business purposes, maybe in Kurt's diagram, maybe the line, the notional line we had going up to the sort of the north as being more optimal for weather, maybe from a business perspective that undoes your operation or your mission goals. And that's where the operators can help us, right? So we can look at where we think it looks good and plots out on a map using data sets, but we don't know what's really best. So that's where the operator perspective comes in. What are you capable of? What do you need today? And what do you do going forward? So as I said, we want to understand this so we can come up with a strategy. Jim also nailed it when he said, and I'll say at the high level, what are we hearing? Direct, safe, and reliable routes. The direct we're hearing is not necessarily straight line. There are lots of missions saying, I don't have to be straight line. I just need to get there as efficiently as possible. And today it may not be a straight line due to terrain or other considerations. So making sure we understood here at MITRE and with the FAA what direct means from an operational perspective. Safe and reliable absolutely became sort of a repeatable and predictable discussion. So safe is, of course, safe from the perspective of weather and other things considerations, but the reliable was repeatable and predictable. So Art, can you go to the next slide for us? So to understand how this all fits in a context, we asked about, as we talked about, we asked about fleet composition avionics systems. So we're hearing a couple of things have changed over the years since we first started this, where we had certain operations, certain operators, especially heavy, large twin turbine helicopters, of course, had pretty advanced capable aircraft and systems and avionics systems. But what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, of course, surveillance, ADS-B out and ADS-B in, providing insights into proximate traffic, right? If we're all going to the same rooftop helicopter, we're going to rooftop hospitals or to certain LZs where other aircraft may be coming in, the opportunity to see them from ADS-B in is a helpful thing. We have, what we're seeing now is a lot of course, it's almost basic standard equipment if you have navigation systems on board for those to be GPS. And we're seeing high degrees of recently, those GPS aircraft, the systems themselves are coming with LPV capability. So we see those as trends. As new helicopters come to market that have avionics systems supporting IFR operations, they have GPS, they have ADS-B, they have LPV, and perhaps even RMP 0.3 capability go with that for routes or supporting that capability. So the other thing that's changed quite a bit and we're hearing is when we ask about current fleet, but also future fleet is that, of course, we're now moving from, it's not just large twin engine turbine type helicopters that will come with these capabilities, but newer aircraft, single engine aircraft, et cetera, also will have these capabilities and also have autopilots to help support these operations, right? So that's the human factors workload piece. We hear an awful lot about discussion for that. We're interested, of course, in the typical flight ops tempo and missions. Some folks, operators who fly IFR routinely all day, all night, in all kinds of conditions. Even VFR, they fly, file an IFR flight plan. Others, their tempos are different. Especially, think of an executive transport, they go as needed or at certain times of the beginning and the end of the workday. So it's important for us to understand that. The operational capabilities and approvals, I touched a little bit on those capabilities, comm, nav, surveillance, but also the approvals that go with it. For those requiring approvals for the commercial operators, again, looking at op specs, looking to see who's approved to use any particular RMP, RNAV, LPV kinds of capabilities and understand that. But what we need is that engagement, again, with the direct operators to better understand how they're using those approvals, if they're actually using those approvals. They may have them and never use them kind of thing. Or maybe they would like to use them more and there is an air traffic component to that. So that's where we get into the current IFR operations, challenges and opportunities. What we've been hearing there, again, of course, there's always the weather, as we talked about with, staying out of icing, staying out of turbulence, those kinds of things, staying away from terrain. But we've also ensuring comms has been something, one for people in valleys, mountainous terrain, things like that, where there can be masking and it's hard to keep and maintain comms at the lower altitudes the helicopters are flying. But the other piece was establishing comms with air traffic in people in heavy metro areas, even getting to the right controllers, having to lift off the ground and wait for a clearance. Those were some challenges brought up and said, hey, we may burn enough gas. We don't have that much range to begin with. We may burn the gas we need to accomplish the mission, waiting for the clearance, which then scrubs the mission. That's a business driver, right? That's a big consideration. So we have been asking about what are the business drivers as well. That kind of brings us to that future fleet's needs and capabilities, because understanding today is helpful. It helps us understand what we're seeing in the data, why people do and don't do things today. That ran us into a metric like, well, they don't use the routes as much as we thought. We don't hear a lot of helicopters asking for this. But on the other side of that, we hear operators telling us perhaps, well, I don't ask because I know I won't get it, or I just ask other people. So, we can balance the equation, or I don't file things unless I need it, and most of the time I don't need it. So we're trying to balance what does success look like, and success sometimes is just having that infrastructure. And some operators have taken it to the other level where I would appreciate the IFR infrastructure to know I'd have comms, terrain clearance, icing, et cetera. And that helps me VFR in a heavy workload. It helps me at night, even if we're not IFR, to know I have those routes. But leaning forward into future fleets, where are you going? What will your needs be? Where would you like your business to be in 4, 5, 6 years? Back to what Art said, we MITRE can keep that sensitive data out of the hands of the public, if you will, from a FOIA perspective. And oftentimes that's very revealing. And so, again, we're happy to receive that information when it's relevant and helpful to understand why certain routes, what routes, where, and most importantly, what does it mean to operationalize this stuff? Drawing a line, we always say it's not the FAA's intent even, I guess, is to not draw lines on a map. It's to create routes that are usable. And that's our success, I think. Measuring stick is hopefully getting to routes of entry that are usable and helpful to you operators to accomplish your business mission goals and business. So that's the business drivers and considerations piece as well. And I think just looking here at my notes, the last piece that's been interesting is and a differentiator has been sort of for-profit, not-for-profit on the business drivers. That's a good example. So we've had good discussions. We welcome more discussions. Art will talk to that, whether it be written feedback or further engagements, and phone calls have been fantastic. As you can see here, I think we've covered all these pieces. The aircraft range performance has been another route. I don't want to say constraint, but it's another consideration. The hot temperature, cold temperature, but just the fact that the aircraft themselves are very weight sensitive and therefore very fuel sensitive. And then pilot training, configuration, and readiness is part of an expense piece of the equation. We're hearing that, and being ready there. And keeping pilots trained and qualified is a challenge, although many operators embrace that. And then we already talked about predictable and repeatable. And the last piece there, I covered at the beginning. So I think we're all set there. So I think that covers what we've been learning and hearing in a quick summary. And we look forward to hearing more and learning more, because every conversation we have, there's always been something new. We've talked to an awful lot of operators, but we want to continue to do that to capture any of these other nuances, because no two operators yet have been exactly the same in terms of their answers or their motivations. So thanks. Back to you, Art.
Thank you, Sean. And so how can you help? Well, we would love to know, how are you positioned to operate IFR today? Similar to that question to open up the meeting. What kinds of IFR operations do you participate in? What are the current barriers? What are your requirements for IFR route structures? And how do you expect your fleet to evolve in the future? Whether that's your actual aircraft fleet or even your business. What are the changes that you expect? So please feel free to use me as a point of contact. I'm more than happy to receive emails on this subject or to schedule Teams or Zoom meetings to have a discussion. But we would love to increase our knowledge from the rotorcraft operators so that we can turn around and better inform Jim and Mike on the low-level IFR route system. And with that, I will ask Dan if there are any questions.
We do have a couple of questions, Art. Thank you. I don't know if you want to bring everybody else back up or if you want to have them answer the questions individually. That said, you were just seeking input from almost anybody in the rotorcraft community. Is there a deadline that you want to receive this data, or is this an ongoing project for you?
Certainly. Thank you. That is a good question. Our project ends at the end of May, and we're focused on providing those recommendations by then to the FAA. So receiving feedback in a feasible manner for us to synthesize it and include it in our report to them, I would say no later than mid next month.
Okay. Our first question comes from Rick Riley, who is the program manager for the FAA and HAI's Fly Neighborly program, which is the purpose is to help reduce the noise impact of helicopters on their communities. And he asks, does the low-level route development consider noise from helicopters or advanced air mobility aircraft?
And I will toss that over to Mr. Arrighi for a response.
Hi. Hey, just like any federal action, if we develop a route, we conduct the appropriate environmental review. Be that categorical exclusion, a environmental assessment, or in some cases that might extend to an environmental impact statement. We do that, in accordance with FAA Order 1050.1F. Environmental policy. That is our environmental policy document. So, and coincidentally, is provided to us by Rick's organization. So, hopefully that will answer the question. It's again, we are at this point intending to, conduct analysis that will inform us on what the need is. So what the current capabilities are and what the need is. So, absolutely, if we develop a route, we conduct the appropriate environmental review on that route.
And I'd just like to add one thing. So the low altitudes on the routes are developed. So, in icing conditions, aircraft can fly as low as they need to. They don't necessarily need to fly that low, if conditions warrant, a higher altitude. So if there are, particular fly friendly altitudes that they should be flying at, I mean, they might be able to maintain those, but that's not something that we specifically, look at. We're looking at, obstacles and trying to get the routes down as low as we can, basically because of icing in the winter.
Okay, we have a question from Brian. Is this research looking to derive processes that will bolster the TK routes currently in use, as well as proposed TK route development?
So before I throw that one over to Jim as well, I just want to add a little bit to the previous question, which is the composite model also takes into account the population density, and that can be easily correlated to where the likelihood of those complaints are. Not saying that there's full environmental impact or NEPA requirements stitched in currently, but it may allow for a rough approximation before any refinement is made. With that said, to address Brian's question on whether or not this research is looking to derive processes to bolster the TK routes, I will toss that again to Mr. Jim Arrighi.
Well, I can, in a word, no, that's not the intention of the analysis. The intention is to inform us about what the capabilities are, what the need is, in the industry, and then that will inform, our strategy to address those needs. So we don't have a timeline for that, development of that, or for, publishing any sort of, low altitude routes. Again, this is analysis to inform us so that we can make intelligent decisions for the future. So, and I'm glad, getting back to that environmental question, we have a contracted with a environmental, firm that is conducting the analysis, and developing the procedures for conducting analysis on the routes that we're working on. Mike's working on in the Maine area.
Okay, we have a second question from Chris, or from Brian. What is your timeline for deployment of a revised low-level route structure based on the results of the research? Art, you mentioned that the deadline was coming up in May, I believe.
Yeah, and that is the deadline for us to provide the results of our research to the FAA. I think this question is more focused on, okay, so then what does the FAA do with those results, or by when?
That's what it sounds like.
And I'll ask Jim to address that one again. Sorry, Jim. You're
that's
the,
quite.
you're,
That's
you're
okay. I wish I was this good at the lottery, But, no, we do not have a currently have a strategy for the deployment of a low-level, helicopter route structure. The analysis is intended to inform us about what the need is. Air ambulance. Certainly that's a priority need. We do, as we indicated in the context and purpose slide, we do have tasking from what we affectionately refer to as THUD, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Report, to develop some routes. In fact, the specifics were met with a single route in Maine. We're pursuing an additional 5 routes in that main structure, and in response to recommendation 31 and RTCA recommendations number 91. So we are conducting the analysis. Helicopter routes are in our scan, but we do not have a plan for National Airspace System wide deployment of a low-level helicopter route structure.
We have a question from Chris. Can we get the FAA support to work with AirInc and OEMs for use of RF segments as a path terminator for low altitude routes? The FAA's support has been largely absent in this necessary modernization.
So you want to punt that one over to me too, Art?
That was not a MITRE question. I'm sorry, Jim.
That's a question, really for our flight standards service. We have a gentleman who's devoted his life to rotary wing aircraft in our flight standards service, Mr. Mike Webb. Unfortunately, I don't think Mike's on with us today, or I would ask him to answer that question. But again, that the path terminator work and what's available to a particular aircraft is going to be handled by our flight standards service.
I could add, at least from our seat, as we've been tasked to understand equipage and capability of the fleets, that would be part of this package and part of our assessment to understand our fleets capable of RF leg and which fleets and those things. So that would be, from that perspective, informing the strategy from a capability perspective, big picture.
So that's a good point. That this very well could help inform flight standards service on what the existing capabilities are, and if there's an identified need, then I certainly can't commit the agency to going down that path to support that with any of the equipment manufacturers or with AirInc to make sure that path terminator is available to helicopter operators.
Yeah, I think we have time for 2 more questions. One more from Brian. What is the status of Life Flight of Maine project? Number of routes developed, and what kind of barriers have you faced in development?
And I'm going to give Jim a reprieve on this one, although I do think that he has the luck of the Irish today, and I'll ask Mr. Mike Hilbert to address that one.
Yeah, sure. So the status of the Light Flight of Maine project is we've got one route, and instrument procedures at each end of those routes have been published and available for the operator. I'm not 100% sure if they've actually flown it yet in actual IMC conditions, but they've definitely been, flight checked, and those are published. We've in the process of finalizing the route design for the next 5 routes, which would be the final route design for the state. We have various publication dates all the way through 2024. So in addition to the 5 routes that are in development, there are 50 or 60 departure procedures and approach procedures that are going to be connected up to various landing sites and departure points along those routes. So hopefully that answers the question thoroughly enough. So, the plan is to get all the published procedures completed by sometime in 2024.
Okay, we do, gentlemen, can you stay on for just a couple of minutes? There's been a couple more questions that have popped up, and I think that there might be enough interest that would be worthwhile. Is that acceptable?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
We've got a question from Lars, and he's using acronyms I'm not familiar with entirely, so I'm going to leave them. He says, I am a PBN manager for LLR in Norway, and there is a discussion whether to require WAAS, then EGNOS capacity for LLR if it is an RNP 03 route. It is not an ICAO requirement, but even though someone is considering this as a requirement, it will limit a number of operators. Is this a discussion in the US?
Well, I can answer that, and unfortunately, we don't have a representative from Flight Standards because that's whose area that would be. So I can't answer that question.
Okay. I may have somebody who can answer that. I'll see about trying to bring him on in just a second. Chris Bauer is a member of HAI Safety Committee. Let's see if I can bring him in. Jeff Smith is asking, is anyone working with anyone in regard to low-level routes requested for the south of Long Island? If it was discussed, I apologize.
And I'll take first crack and say not to my knowledge, but I'll also kick it to Mike in case he knows better than I.
I don't have any knowledge about those routes.
I could say that we've engaged with Eastern Region Helicopter Council and the operators flying in that region to help them inform this activity based on the set of questions we had before. So many of the operators we polled are users of those routes or operating in that area. So I can at least say at that level, not so much talking to the routes and the usability of routes, rather than, again, back to the needs and what they like and what they're hoping and planning to be able to do in the future.
Thank you, Sean.
Okay, and I did bring up Chris Bauer, who said that he was able to answer the question from Norway. Chris, are you able to join us this afternoon?
Yes, thanks, Dan. The question, if I understand it correctly, is if you have a SBAS enabled low-level route, which would be either supported by WAS or EGNOS, so space-based augmentation, providing a WAS or a RMP containment of 0.3, that would be navigable to an operator who has that in their operation specification. So even in Norway, you would have to have in your op spec that you can perform RNP 0.3 on low-level airways or RNP APCH on your approaches. So yes, it's possible. You would just have to demonstrate to your regulator that you're equipped and trained for that operation. And it's not uncommon here in the United States. We have many, many operators that have that op spec. In fact, there's a recent article, if you want to look in Vertical Magazine, that we participated in that described that process in great detail. And in the United States, it's H123 is the op spec that goes into allowing you to perform that navigation. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Chris. That's one of the things I truly love about this industry and doing this webinar series. We seem to have subject matter experts that are always willing to provide information. I think that actually does wrap up our questions for the webinar today. So if we could get Art and Mike and Sean and Jim and Kurt to join us back on screen. Certainly want to express my deepest appreciation to each of you for coming on and sharing your knowledge and information today. This topic obviously was of interest to people around the world, not just the United States. And so deeply appreciate your time and assistance putting this together. Jim, Viola?
Yeah, thanks. Certainly thanks to everybody at the panel today and Chris for jumping in also. I think Sean sums up a lot of it that, certainly, what does direct mean? It's not an easy answer. It's a complexity one, but the predictable and repeatable so that people can plan for it is certainly a key element. So thanks for all your input today. And like I said, it's all about education and then sharing best practices to make the environment as safe as possible for the vertical lift aircraft. So appreciate all your hard work.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, time to wrap things up for the week. Save the date. Oddly enough, Heli Expo has occupied quite a bit of my time over the last 6 weeks, and so the schedule is coming together quickly, but it's not complete right now for the next few webinars. Next week, we have an interesting topic. We have a professor from Ohio State University who's going to be joining us to discuss how to best take advantage of an accident. It doesn't necessarily need to be punitive. What can you learn from every accident? And I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation for us. I do know that we have topics coming up that will involve our Salute to Excellence winners for this year. We have some interesting topics coming up on possibly air medical, things like, air medicine, FAA medicine rather, and just a number of other topics. I do pay attention to your requests for webinars as well. Speaking of that, once again, there we go. We do have a follow-up questionnaire coming to you very shortly. We'd like to know what, aside from my technology and my speaking today, what didn't work for this webinar for you. And if you do have suggestions for upcoming webinars, we're always looking for good topics. If not only that, if you have ideas for speakers for these topics as well, we're always interested in looking for those. If there's something that HAI can do for you, we'd like to know that as well. What is HAI doing for its members? What could we do more of? What do you think we're doing a good job for? Best way to do that is the email address you see at the bottom of the screen, president@rotor.org. Send Jim your thoughts. He reads all those emails. He does respond. He does task our staff with responding when it's appropriate. And so we'd like to know what HAI could do more for everybody. That does wrap us up for this week. We do appreciate that you took time out of your schedule to join us. There is going to be a recording available. We'll make it available tomorrow afternoon, hopefully, both on our website and on our YouTube channel. Until next week, we ask that you fly safe, that you be safe, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Thank you.